really is an honor to facilitate this dialogue this morning, where we gather not only to celebrate women's achievement and their collective mobilization, but to examine the areas that wherein the voices and their voices remain underrepresented, especially in the field of diplomacy. In a world increasingly shaped by geopolitical turbulence, nationalism, and shifting alliances, diplomacy has become both more complex and more consequential. South Africa, like many nations, must navigate this terrain with strategic finesse. But today we ask a deeper question. Where are the women in this process in the geopolitics? Women have long been present, and we acknowledge this as ambassadors, negotiators, analysts, policy shapers, yet their contributions often remain under-recognized, and the gendered dimensions of foreign policy are always, or find themselves underexplored. This seminar today invites us to reflect on how women shape diplomacy, how they are excluded from it, and how their priorities, from reproductive rights to economic empowerment, are advanced or sidelined in global negotiations. As Audre Lorde reminds us, your silence will not protect you. These words challenge us to speak, to act, and to lead, not just for ourselves, but for those whose voices are still waiting to be heard. So I invite us to make this space a bold space of reflection, of engagement, thinking, where we ask these questions and when we try to ask and answer these questions, which are more than just academic questions. They are foundational into us building inclusive, more responsive foreign policy cultures and foreign policy futures. So, to me saying any further words, I will ask humbly Dr. M. Mulabo, is the acting vice principal of strategic risk and advisory services in their capacity for standing in for principal and vice chancellor Professor Buleni Lenkabula to come up to stage and give us the welcome remarks this morning. Thank you.
They're all fine. At least it's warming up. I hope I'm audible. Okay. Um, Let me first recognize you, Program Director and Temelusi Ntungwa from the Communication Science Department, and also to greet you, our esteemed guests, academics present, professional staff, support staff, our distinguished speakers, honorable friends and partners of the University of South Africa, organizations that are represented here this morning, and other structures of the university, and externally, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a privilege to be standing here before you this morning to welcome you on behalf of our Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Buleni Kabula, at this timely and deeply significant Women's Day seminar this year, 2025, hosted by the UNISA's Department of Leadership and Transformation under the theme Women and Diplomacy, Women in South Africa's Engagement with Fast-Changing Geopolitics, which is part of our ongoing commitment to fostering critical dialogue around gender, transformation, and national development. This thing is more than a reflection of current global realities. It is a clarion call for a deeper reflection and decisive action. Let me also convey quickly to say the Principal and Vice Chancellor, Professor Pulendeng Kabula, could not join you this morning due to another engagement which is scheduled the same time as this one. Actually, I think she was scheduled 3 weeks, but we had to take the load off her shoulders, to represent her. But she has asked me to convey her warmest regards and well wishes for a successful and impactful seminar. Let me begin by also extending my heartfelt congratulations to the Department of Leadership and Transformation for convening this critical dialogue during this month of August. Kwediabo Mme, our National Women's Month, a period of commemoration, reflection, and above all, action. I think this is one of our first seminars that will take us, take this Women's Month off the ground for us to start celebrating this very important occasion. We are also privileged to be joined by Dr. Palesa Skhejane, who is the Deputy Executive Dean in the Faculty of Natural Sciences at Walter Sisulu University, and also Mayor Zingiswa Losi, the President of Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. And I know that you are involved also with many other, structures. And Dr. Ng Makhabani, the Director of Internationalization and Partnerships at the University of South Africa. These are remarkable women whose experience span academia, organized labor, international diplomacy, and strategic partnerships. And we are really looking forward to their presentations this morning and to learn more from them and to see how we take this task forward and to see how we enhance our women in diplomacy and politics forward. Through their reflections and insights, we hope to illuminate not only the contribution women are already making, but also the spaces where their leadership is still needed. This August occasion, ladies and gentlemen, pay tribute to the resilience, brilliance, and leadership of women in a world that is increasingly characterized by complexity, polarization, and geopolitical volatility. It offers a moment not only to honor women's past contributions to diplomacy, but to chart a more inclusive and gender-aware path forward to in shaping our national and continental futures. We got against the backdrop of diplomatic turbulence, wherein the world is witnessing the erosion of multilateral cooperation, a surge in nationalism, and the rising dominance of transactional diplomacy. South Africa, like many countries of the global south, must navigate this new terrain with wisdom and balance, weighing our strategic interests while defending our sovereignty and asserting. The tension is ever more pronounced in the lead up to the G20 summit, which South Africa is honored to be hosting later this year. Amidst this shifting global currents, women, although disproportionately affected by conflict, economic instability, and social exclusion, remain too often absent from the negotiation tables where decisions about the futures are made. This absence comes at a cost not only to women and girls, but to the durability and fairness of global peace and policy making. As the African proverb reminds us, until the lioness tells her story, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And we know that, right? Yet we have seen glimmers of transformation. We do acknowledge that something is happening, but we still have a long way to go. South African women such as Dr. Protea, Dr. Naledi Pandwa, Geraldine Fraser Muleketi, Dr. Geraldine Fraser Muleketi, Memo Hau Peko, and Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I'm sure the list can be longer than this, have each played formidable roles in the diplomatic arena, leading regional peace missions, advancing gender-sensitive foreign policy, and asserting South Africa's global leadership. Their work alongside the advocacy for feminist organizations like the Women's Legal Center and Sonke Gender Justice reflects the profound impact that women can and do make in shaping diplomatic landscapes. These are the lioness who are changing the narrative. But I wish our students were here. We need other lioness of the future to take this struggle forward to making sure that our representation is well recognized. And while I'm saying this, I also, we are happy that, UNISA, we are hosting Ambassador Joyce Lesego, who will be, pivotal in helping us, to pave our way in areas of diplomacy and to grow the future generation of women in that space. While, the road remains long, we remain hopeful. And research continues to show how the underrepresentation of women has evolved over time to a state of improvement, um, particularly in high stakes diplomacy, global conflict resolutions, and high level peace processes. According to the United Nations, for quite a number of years, between 1992 and 2022, women in diplomacy represented only 13% of negotiations, 6% of mediations, and 6% of signatories in peace processes world, worldwide. And this is the information that was shared in the June 2022 United Nations General Assembly resolution. And in the same resolution that declared June 24 as the International Day of Women in Diplomacy, an achievement of women's struggles for a place in international politics, at least to recognize advancement in this space. But we can see some progress. We can see that in 2024, the Peace Research Institute Oslo report points out that we still need to reach a critical mass of representation of women ambassadors, and we still have to work hard to making sure that at least by 2023, when you look at the past statistics, at least it had gone up to 30%. However, we still have a huge task ahead as women and nurturers. And while we want to celebrate the achievements that that I have mentioned, we cannot lay in our laurels. And as women and also as nurturers, yes, we cannot celebrate while children in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mozambique, and other places are dying, going hungry while the world is just watching. This seminar thus comes at a critical time as it seeks to elevate the role of women in diplomacy, question the gendered assumptions that underpin foreign policy, and interrogate the exclusionary dynamics of international engagement. Some of the key questions to be addressed today are not only relevant but urgent. How are women shaping or being excluded from current diplomatic engagements? Are gendered priorities like reproductive rights, gender-based violence, and economic empowerment adequately represented on global platforms? Also, do women bring distinct diplomatic strategies or perspectives that foster longer lasting agreements and more humane global governance? And how can we as a country and as a university further support the development and influence of women in the foreign policy space? This is more than just a conversation about representation. It is a call for transformation, a rethinking of what diplomacy looks like, who speaks, and whose voice carries weight in the global arena. As another African proverb teaches us, the river may be mighty, but it is the small drops that fills it. So the small steps are there, and I am sure that we will get there someday. Ka Sesotho ra re noka e tla tswa ke dinokana, and I'm sure dinokana say one thing they will really feel that river, and we will get there for the consumption of everyone who wants to enjoy the source of water from that river. Each perspective, each voice, each woman diplomat adds to the strength of that river, shaping the course with wisdom, tenacity, and vision. As a leading institution in distance higher education on the continent, we carry the responsibility to stimulate a critical discourse, to produce scholarship that shapes public policy, and to empower the next generation of leaders, especially women, to participate fully in all spheres of national and international life. The seminar is part of that mission. Let me once again congratulate the Department of Leadership and Transformation under the leadership of Professor Kuno, who's here with us, and maybe the other colleagues who are represented here. And we thank you for the occasion and on this visionary initiative. May the deliberations today be bold, intersectional, and inspiring, and may they help us advance a diplomacy that is more just, inclusive, and attuned to the realities of us all. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to our colleagues and from the Department of Transformation and Leadership for this occasion, and we are looking forward to a fulfilled morning or even the afternoon, I think. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Doc. Um, Thank you for reminding us um, that this conversation is not about representation. I think that we get tied up in politics of representation. This conversation is not to demand representation, but it is to demand transformation and for the shifting of the contours of our understanding and the involvement of women within diplomacy. So thank you very much for that. And I believe that as the proverb that you shared with us today, which says that until the lioness shares her story. I think we are here at this space today to allow for the lioness to share her story so that we can move forward and move away from the gaze that has been given to the other. Thank you so much for those opening words. I'd like to invite our host today, um, Professor Grace Kuno, who is the Acting Executive Director in the Department of Leadership and Transformation, to provide us and offer us a bit of understanding on the purpose of today's seminar. Prof. Grace, the floor is yours.
Dumelang colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Mulata, for those welcoming words. Um, so, as I was driving today, I was listening to Nina Simone. I was listening to, and I was touched by this song. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. And it's quite surprising because last week, Friday, I was having a meeting with a co-collaborator of mine, and she was talking about how she is writing about Nina Simone in contemplating the idea of freedom. I I I I think this because um, in 1956, on the 9th of August, more than 20,000 women took to the streets to go challenge apartheid government. Um, this moment was significant in our history, and this is why we are here today. We meet every year in this month to put on the table the issues that face women. And we do this because um, we have not arrived. Many of us can say that why continue talking about gender equality issues? We have a woman president for ISAFU. We have a woman vice chancellor at UNISA. We do this because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of women who are unable to enter these rooms. We talk about these issues because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of women who ask everything, how would it feel for me to be free? So we are here today because that question remains significant. And we are raising this question with the theme of diplomacy, because the question of freedom remains a significant question for women in the world and in South Africa. Sometimes I write things down and I forget to read them. So I also wanted to say that this march in 1956 came in the backdrop of multiple other everyday struggles fought by women or where women died. And we are grateful that we, our generation, is doing the work of excavating and speaking the names of those women who died, who fought, who we don't hear about. That is why we are here today, because we want the women who influence policies, their names to be spoken. We don't come from a history where women sat at home. We come from a history where women were in the streets confronting, and the women continue to confront. Today we ask the question, how do they continue confronting in the diplomatic space? I'm grateful that we have the speakers that we have today, and I'm grateful that the room is full, and I'm grateful that the virtual world is also full. Thank you, colleagues. That is why we are here today.
Thank you, Prof. Grace. Um, as I'm sitting, as Dr. Mulak was speaking, and Prof. Grace now speaks, there's something that is in me. And I am one person who wants to please listen to the voice that's inside. And I'm reminded of a comment that was made that was to remind us that in 1956, on that day, when those thousands of women marched to the union buildings, they stopped there and sat there in silence for 30 minutes, a silent march for 30 minutes. And in thinking about that, I think that it would be a disservice for us to gather in this space and to not acknowledge the power of that silence. Because women have agitated in very visceral ways, but also in silences and in quiet ways that continue to push the agenda forward. And I'd like us to, please, if you will indulge me, to take just a minute in silence. In silence, not only to remember the work of those women and the women that who have fought and who have died for this liberation and for what we see in this country today, but for the women who continue to die in this country, and not only in this country. We remember the women who die in Sudan, the women who die in the DRC, the women who die in Gaza, and every other place where there is turmoil. And I would like us to just take a second. We don't need to close our eyes. We don't need to do anything. Just to take this 1 minute in silence to contemplate about the role that these women have played and the role that women continue to play. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me and allowing us to just center ourselves in remembering before we move on. I now have the infinite pleasure to introduce our speakers, and our first speaker for the day will be Prof. Grace. When she was introducing me to Miss Zingi, so she's like, "You know her?" I'm like, "Yeah, how can we not know her?" How will we ever forget that moment a couple of months ago? So I'd like to call on Ms. Zingi Swanosi, and if I read her bio, Ms. Zingi Swanosi is the president of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. She was elected to the portfolio during the 13th National Congress in 2018. She also has served in the ANC youth league structures in the Eastern Cape. Ms. Losi is a trained soldier, by the way, who has served at some point as part of the South African Defence Force for 3 years. After resigning from the army, she was employed by Ford as a car manufacturer in Port Elizabeth, as an operator in engine components and assembly division in 2002. She became a quality inspector. In 2002, Ms. Losi became a shop steward of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, at the plant in PE. At the same time, she served in various NUMSA committees such as finance and education in the Eastern Cape region. As a senior leader, she hopes to build a strong federation and ensure that women swell the ranks of the federation's leadership. She would love to see women taking up their rightful place in the federation, not for the purpose of achieving gender equality, but for the transformation of a broader society. Her leadership extends beyond COSATU, as she also holds the position of president of the South African Trade Union Coordinating Council, SATU, um, SATUC, and has been re-elected to this role in October 2022. Additionally, she's a member of the International Trade Union Confederation's General Council. With her family. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Ms. Zingi Swanos.
you very much. Mansa, long live the undying spirit of the women of 1956, long live. Long live the undying spirit of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, long live. Thank you very much, Program Director Mtungwa. Thank you, Prof, for allowing me to say Amandla. I'm a bit confused. I'm like, should I not? The unfortunate part is that I can't sing. For the life in me, I can't save myself. No, but I can talk. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me here amongst the greatest men in South Africa. And Program Director Mtungwa, Dr. Mulapo, Siabulela Visi, Prof. Grace, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen that are here. Indeed, thank you for the invitation. I was not sure how we were going to go about our discussion, whether it was going to be a question or going to through what you have asked us to respond to. But on behalf of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, we want to appreciate the invitation for being here. And we must say that we gather here today to discuss women and diplomacy in a world that is increasingly hardened into rival blocs, a world that is defined by wars, as Prof and Tunga you have said, a world that is defined by economic competition and mounting authoritarianism. We are meeting when across the globe we see war-torn communities, as it was said, from Ukraine to Palestine, Sudan, Yemen, and where human rights are being sidelined in favor of a unipolar order. We're meeting when the powerful states in the global north resist the global south's call for a more inclusive multipolar world, one that is built in cooperation, equity, and respect for diversity. And in all of this, one truth remains, that the working class women suffer the most from all these crises. Yet they are the ones that are underrepresented in decision-making spaces. So we are asked to speak about why our working class women, or actually where are working class women in diplomacy? Our response is that working class women, your teachers, your nurses, your farm workers, your domestic workers, they remain largely absent from diplomatic spaces. Not through lack of capacity, but through diplomacy that is being structured as an elite domain that is divorced from the grassroots realities. That is why they are not in those spaces. And in forums like the ILO, United Nations, or the African Union, women trade unionists, from COSAP to ourselves, we have been consistent in raising the urgent questions on inequality, on precarity and exploitation. But we must say that at times our voices are often dismissed. They are often dismissed as social concerns, the issues that we're raising, while security and trade dominates the discussion. Science diplomacy, meanwhile, remains a technocratical and a detached discussion, ignoring the realities of women in clinics, ignoring the realities of women in classrooms, in faculties, in factories, and in rural fields. And for us, we believe that
To be legitimate, diplomacy must be democratized. It must be rooted in the people. It must reflect lived realities, and it must be accountable to the everyday communities and not only to the state or to the few elites. And so we are then asked, on gender priorities, are they being advanced or they're being undermined? We want to say that issues like the reproductive rights, gender-based violence, care work, and women's economic empowerment are routinely treated as soft issues, soft side issues in foreign policy. They are treated as secondary to trade and security. Yet for us, these are matters of life and death. And in South Africa, with one of the world's highest femicide rates, and I remember when I raised this issue in Washington, South Africans went crazy, men in particular. They said, but you have gone beyond the line in portraying South Africa in a bad light. You should not have said the things that you said. But no one speaks about the plight of rural women. It's violence and femicide that women are going through. We are going to Washington. What we must talk about is trade issues and security issues, and not the real issues of that must form part of diplomacy, the rate of gender-based violence and femicide that rural women are, who at most are not represented in such forums. The reality is that Black working class women face violence daily. They face it at home, they face it in public spaces and in their workspace spaces. And the question that we must ask is, what freedom remains when omama bethu, when osisi bethu, when amadodakazi, they live in daily fear? What freedom remains? Economic empowerment for us must go beyond neoliberal entrepreneurship rhetoric. It must mean decent work. It must mean living wages. It must mean maternity protection. It must mean universal social protection. For us, it must mean rights and not just slogans. And so a different style of diplomacy then must prevail. Ourselves as women in the labor movement, we must say that what we bring a distinct diplomatic style. We bring a diplomatic style that is grounded in collective bargaining, that is grounded in democratic solidarity, and that is grounded in principle-based accountability. Our diplomacy is accountable to ordinary workers, not flags or faceless states. And for us across the global south, feminist unionists are forging alliances linking labor rights, linking migrant justice and gender equality, showing what solidarity-based diplomacy can look like. So, and I'm happy that the speakers before me, when they were welcoming us, Doc, you spoke about the trailblazers and South African women that are trailblazers. Some of them have picked on them. And I want to say that all of us here as women in South Africa, in the region and in the African continent, and the world will stand on the broad shoulders of our giants. So Mamu Gertrude Shope is a former trade unionist and an ANC international activist. Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, former chair of the African Union, uMama uPhumzile Mlambo-Nyika, former executive director of United Nations Women, Her Honorable, as you have mentioned, Doc Ambassador Unozipho Mkakato Lesego, our permanent representative in the United Nations in New York, Ambassador Her Excellency Umatu Join, who brings a unique perspective that is rooted in social work, that is rooted in academic feminism and diplomatic leadership. These are our trailblazers in South Africa, and each of them champions pan-African and global South-aligned diplomacy. You know, when I was in New York recently, in the high-level political forum, it was so great to hear the ILO in New York saying to myself as a South African delegate, how proud we are of the South African embassy in New York, led by Her Excellency Join, in how she articulates the voice of the Global South, and that office led by Her Excellency Ujoin is one that the ILO can rely on in addressing issues of diplomacy, but in particular that relates to human rights. So beyond them, of course, we have countless women in the trade union movement who have taken diplomatic positions as ambassadors, but also across border solidarity, even abanye babo that we don't normally hear about, that their work lies dormant, not because they are not doing anything. Indeed, Pudmelusi, women are shaping the foreign and science policy. Women unionists, I speak from where I'm coming from, have led in challenging patriarchal developmental models that we see. During COVID-19, we will remember that it was ourselves as trade union women in particular who were demanding for vaccine equity. We demanded for safe workplaces. We demanded for a recognition of care work, which is still a struggle that we continue to pursue. In climate negotiations, women in the trade union movement are there in advancing a just transition that lies ecological sustainability to decent work and gender equity. We are bringing indigenous knowledge. We are talking to gender disaggregated data and lived experiences into scientific decision making. So we are then asked, what is a different vision on feminist diplomacy? For us, feminist diplomacy centers on human rights over military security. For us, feminist diplomacy is people-to-people solidarity over corporate statecraft. For us, feminist diplomacy is community-rooted partnerships over elite deals. And union women assert that worker rights and social justice are not add-ons in these conversations, but they are central diplomatic pillars. That feminism is not just representation in the room, but rather it is redistribution of power and the building of just alternatives, both locally and globally. And I'm happy that the speaker said, this is not just about counting how many of us are representing women in certain positions. It is about us finding a voice. And that the decisions are reflective of ourselves as women. And so the challenges that demand women's leadership today for us, we want to say that our diplomatic agenda must address the following issues that we're confronted with now: the US tariff threats and trade realignment, protecting jobs in the auto sector, in the agricultural sector, in the textile, in the farming sector, in the mining sector. We must speak to plastics treaty negotiations, safeguarding waste pickers that dominantly are women, and informal worker livelihoods. We must speak to xenophobia across the SADC region. We've seen what we woke up to, which for us sometimes portrays itself as Afrophobia, more than it generally being xenophobia. But also importantly, in the diplomatic spaces, defending migrant worker dignity and the rights. Yesterday, when I was watching the news on lines that are running through, saying Zimbabwe calls for South Africa to respect human rights as it relates to health sector issues. You ask yourself, but Zimbabweans that are in South Africa, they did not choose to come here. This is forced migration, exactly because human rights are not being respected in the country of origin. But in the diplomatic spaces, we're not talking about these human rights and the rights of migrant workers, migrant labor, until we have uprisings that are taking place. And all of a sudden, heads of state in those countries of origin begin to want to have a conversation about lecturing everyone else about human rights. The just transition debates, these just transition debates for us must include rural women households in climate responses. And we must also, in the agenda, talk about the wars across Africa and Palestine, making civilian protection and human rights a central issue. And as I end, program director, I want to say that women must not just remain passive recipients of aid or handouts, but we must be active architects of a just future. A future where diplomacy serves people and not profits. A future where working class women stand at the center stage and not at the margins. A future where feminist principles guide peace, they guide prosperity, and they guide planetary justice. And we want to say, for us, COSATU, and for South Africa, and for the Global South, we think this is the diplomacy we must fight for in order for us to have a just world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lucy, for that really rousing presentation that centers the voices of working class women. Thank you for bringing to the fore solidarity and the need and the necessity for solidarity in creating this multipolar world. Um, we move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Palesa Skejane, who is the Deputy Executive Dean for the Faculty of Natural Sciences at the Walter Sisulu University. Dr. Palesa Skejane is a biomedical technologist and researcher with a dedication to advancing research and policy advice in Africa, particularly through the lenses of science, technology, and innovation, STI. Currently serving as the Deputy Executive Dean in the Faculty of Natural Sciences at the Walter Sisulu University, she brings a wealth of experience from previous roles, including acting as the Interim Executive Head of the Human Science Research Council, where she led Africa-focused research through the African Institute of Southern Africa, and the Director of Strategic Partnerships, where she played a pivotal role in fostering cross-continental collaborations to strengthen health and technology strategies. Dr. Skejane holds a doctoral degree in biotechnology with specialization in biophonetics, as well as an MTech degree, all from the University of Johannesburg. She further honed her experience in the field through training at the University of Illinois in the United States. Her research spans health governance, biosciences, and public health, and is a vocal advocate for strengthening capacity in STEM-related fields, and believes in a multidisciplinary approach to enhance the impact of science on the continent. Her leadership includes roles such as the chairperson of the Science of Africa's Foundation African Fellowship Program, and active participation in international research platforms, including UNESCO, as well as strategic partnerships in science diplomacy, including innovation committees. Committed to inclusive progress, Dr. Skejane actively works on initiatives to enhance access to resources and technologies for marginalized communities, advocating for a fundamentally transformed science capabilities in Africa that prioritizes human development. She has participated in major discussions about gender equity in science and health innovation across the African continent. Dr. Skejane's multifaceted work and commitment to healthcare reform, science, technology in Africa make her a key figure in the ongoing conversation about sustainable health and innovation in Africa. I would like to invite Dr. Skejane to the floor.
Morning, colleagues. First, let me, I don't know why science diplomats are not being greeted by Igamalama Kosika, because now I feel like, you are entrenching the view that science is very much north more than it is part of us. Just kidding. The way to good morning, Dumelang, Absheni, Ahe colleagues. It is a privilege to stand on the protocol that has already been established. It is further a privilege and an honor to to have been invited here, particularly on this complex topic. But also, I think, as I was listening to you reading my bio, uh, I got to understand that sometimes when some of the colleagues, they meet me, they ask me, so where have you been? How been all over and you've done all this work? And of course, I think all of that work that has been quoted as part of the advocacy work I've done, um, be it through research, engagement, etc. I think I also want to reiterate that it's thanks to the women that mentored and supported me to have been there. I think I also hold a very complex bio in terms of the transition from the natural sciences to the social sciences, where, of course, I would humbly not claim to be a specialist in, but consider it a field where has assisted in shaping the understanding of science, as the previous speaker has alluded to, and how we've come to understand science in other instances not being transformative. And today, as we engage in this conversation around the science diplomacy, I think the previous speaker has touched on several aspects, so I'll try to not repeat them. But I think colleagues, just the three considerations as I was thinking about this complex conversation, particularly if we are talking about science diplomacy. And it's always fascinating as one revisits the typology of science diplomacy. As I was engaging with Prof. Kuno, I said that to me, what we see happening today as well, it's no different from what we saw during the era of COVID-19. It was a crisis. So we sit with science diplomacy being another crisis, which I think we need to take advantage of and not let it go to waste. So on some of the considerations that I thought about, really we've talked about the underrepresentation or the representation, and I'm quite glad that the stance has been set clear that when we are talking about representation, we are not talking numbering, we are talking centering and transformation. So that's one of the considerations as far as in the science disciplines, and as we are ushering in the conversations around what science diplomacy is and the women in the science diplomacy, particularly in the African continent, we know that we have about just 30% of women representing the fields of sciences. And the second consideration really being on the foreign policy, which also my previous speaker has touched to, as to what does foreign policy talk to, or what should science diplomacy address as far as the foreign policy is concerned. Because I do think that we do have glitches with our science, with our foreign policy, whereby at some point our foreign policy takes a particular posture, and at a particular point it can be contradictory. And the third consideration really being on the trade diversions. I think when we get to the questions, President Lucy will really hammer on those trade diversions, because importantly, as we are talking about the impeding tariffs, I think tomorrow, 7th of August, as they kick in, we are sitting and contemplating on how a province like where I am deployed currently, Eastern Cape, is going to look like, because that's where these automotive industries are located. That's the second most impoverished province in this country. But also, I think it's a privilege of being able to think about this terrorism within South Africa. But if you have to expand the thinking, the thoughts of the political ideology across the boundaries of this country, what does that begin to look like? I think earlier on, as we are touching on this deportees from the US, at a critical moment of these tariffs kicking in, we have the deportees coming in Swatini, and then it is Rwanda, and of course we appreciate and understand the tension between South Africa and Rwanda. Where is that going to push us diplomatically in the continent, particularly a continent that is supposed to be looking to its African frameworks on trade, such as AFCFTA. But at this critical juncture, then we are going to be faced with these kinds of challenges. Now, colleagues, really delving into the geopolitical tensions and gender. I'm hoping that I will not be doing a disservice by not getting into the depths of the background as we have seen the tariffs and the geopolitical shifts. But also, I think, as in preparation to this seminar, I noticed that, and I remember that period, but also it was, I don't think I was so engaged with that period. 2022, 2023, when these tariffs also emerged and the way, and I think the conversation around AGOA was becoming rife, and we're talking about dumping of chicken, etc. But also at that point in time, I began to ask myself in reflecting that, actually, what was that moment? I'm hoping that as we are seated in this room, we'll be able to remind each other as to whose voice was leading at that point in time. Poultry sector, how were we thinking about the economy and who's going to be affected and at what point, what does it mean? Because also sometimes we become so excited or excitable by conducting research that speaks to impact and therefore the transformation, but we have not been able to really test the power, the mighty power of policy at the ground level, where also my previous speaker was talking about the fact that we have not begun to scratch the surface as we make these as we are engaging in these negotiations. And I will get back to some of the figures that emerged. But really also part of the things that we have thought about as this moment approaches, without really getting into much details. With the US tariffs being imposed on other sectors, but then selectively not imposing them on critical minerals, and not imposing them on critical minerals when they also when the US also understands that that will push South Africa to also trade much more with China, because we're trading much more with raw materials between ourselves and China. Now, for me, the reason I'm saying this is another COVID crisis moment and why we should take advantage of it is because if we are talking about the AFCFTA, and yet we are sitting with this conundrum of two superpowers, then what is a calling for us as a country, but the SADC, and ensuring that what we aspire to achieve as far as the AFCFTA is concerned, we can hold on to that. And for me, it also does not, when you do most of the critical work around South Africa's foreign policy, South Africa comes across as we are dominating in terms of the influence. But I think this is an opportune moment to demonstrate that influence, because although we can say the US and China are the top two, I'm quite curious to see who are the top 2, 3 in this continent who will emerge as our top trading partner, and how we are going to balance that trading diversification. And of course, the regional instability, we can't usher in a conversation about diplomacy and neglect the regional instability. I think it was just this week where we learned of the floods in Sudan. I'll be honest, I have not read, I heard it passively, but we know what has been the challenge in the Sudan, in the South Sudan, and the impasse that is not coming to an end. There are peace and security challenges that are rendering the region unstable. But also, again, as I earlier on mentioned, with the deportees, as it is ensuing with Rwanda, I'm quite curious as to how is that going to deepen the already existing instability in this continent, in this region. It was not so long ago when we had to withdraw the troops in that region, and of course, where there are also troops, we know that the science or the technology exists, because we do make use of the technology to settle the scores. So my concerns really around the gendered livelihoods, or the impacts on of the livelihoods as far as the genders are concerned. It's really that there will be a reversal of the formalization of work. Particularly, I think, again, I'll take it back to where I come from. by virtue of the institution or the university, where we know that female employment will likely regress by about 12% in the Eastern Cape versus the 7% in the country nationally. And also the informal sector, which will grow, and of course, most likely, with the women traders, will likely go back to the informal sector and face, we are likely to look at about 34%. It's significant. 34% is significant if you have to push women into the informal trading. There's nothing wrong with informal trading, but we also know that it comes with certain barriers that will not allow women to, that will not make access to these women to be quite easy, especially in the townships, and also where you have a setting that is not so developed as far as infrastructure is concerned. Movement, mobility, etc. is not so well developed. And also it will affect the education as far as the intergenerational effects are concerned, because we are likely to see a high dropout rate in the high school, and those who are likely to drop out are girls, who will have to see the taking over the responsibility of the households, and also generate income to ensure that their households are well cared of. But also, in the Eastern Cape, as per the HSRC's previous surveys, we know that we have faced about 60% of dropouts in school, with a high likelihood of absolute poverty, not abstract poverty. So these tariffs are going to kick in, they're going to deepen that reality. I want to, I will skip on certain parts for the purpose of time. But really, I think also as we, and also I will not delve into, it was spoken to with regard to the representation of women in the South Africa's diplomatic mission, which is about 34% of the South African missions represented around the world. But I think interestingly, also if we think about that, the voice, as we alluded earlier on, the voice that has to drive that transformation. With 34% of this representation in female figures that have to operate under particular environments that are dictated to by certain cultures, when we are in such kinds of moments whereby there is this rise of nationalism, these tectonic shifts that are driven by the geopolitical tensions, we know that those women are likely also to lose their voices. I think President Losi, you were kind in terms of articulating the situation in New York, whereby, yes, there is Ambassador, Excellency Ambassador Joyina there, but when the time for pressure, when pressure kicked in, we know that that face faded off. So I think you are kind with the truth there, you are economical with the truth as to what happened, and I'm going to leave it to you to actually educate us. But coming back to the science diplomacy, I think the issue of science diplomacy, colleagues, it is complex to think about science diplomacy during these kinds of resurgences that we are seeing. And I'm saying this because I think it's a topic that I keep thinking over and over about it. At one point, I'm a scientist that is excited by science diplomacy because of the future it holds. At another point, I know also just how science diplomacy can exclude us. When you look at the trade of the science technology trade, it's South Africa and America most of the time as far as technology is concerned. But yet the representation of women in the sciences, if it still sits at 30%, what is the point of having a superpower being a dictator of science diplomacy when it cannot yield the transformation, gender transformation that we want to see? So for me, I agree with President Losi as far as we must feel shifts at community level. We must see science partnering with community and not excluding the indigenous knowledge, because as this science has been existent over and over, there's also been an over-reliance of this aid or grant that's coming from the global north. And of course, I'm not a fan of talking about the global north because it perpetuates the stereotype that global north is far developed and we're less developed. But I think also at this juncture, when you think about which diplomacy is developed currently, I think we stand a chance to say South Africa's style of diplomacy and foreign policy position, it is developed. Yes, it does have areas where we must still ensure that we speak to those challenges of contradictions. Areas of contradictions, it's for us to utilize democracy to ensure that we can speak to those areas of contradictions. But when we look at the science diplomacy coming or being informed by the global north that is so developed, currently it is yielding those inhumane, deporting those who are less or subhuman into the areas that are not so human. Yet we understand the science diplomacy, it is to drive the lives of those who need science the most forward. So in conclusion, colleagues, as the tariffs are going to kick in, I'm hoping that we can use this moment of crisis to ensure that the position of women, it is not lost. We do not just lose the conversation to a trade discussion, as opposed to what are the day-to-day ramifications, implications that will kick in, and how do we think we are resilient or we have built locally resilient strategies and frameworks to take that forward. I am impressed by the fact that, yes, when it comes to research, I've seen that we have put about 600 million that we are going to have South African Medical Research Council safeguarding that research. All well and good because then it safeguards our health equity or health challenges. But then there are other challenges such as we don't eat policy colleagues, at home when we are sitting as lalini. So I'm hoping that those considerations will also be taken into consideration. Thank you very much, Program Director. I hope I did not go over time.
And to reiterate Dr. Skejana's last words, we do not eat policy, colleagues. We do not eat policy when we are at home. And I love the connection in the conversation because, again, she reiterates the necessity and the need for grassroots development of this policy, of this, of this diplomacy that we are thinking about today. Because at the end of the day, all of these policies can be developed, but if there is no grassroots solidarity, if there's no grassroots engagement, then how do we then actually see this coming into fruition? How does that then change the material conditions of people, and particularly women, in areas like Dr. Skejana has spoken about in the Eastern Cape, and the unfortunate devastation that ill-informed diplomacy positions have the potential of a meeting against them. I will thank our previous speakers and will call on our last speaker, Apa Ekaya, who will be the last speaker. Before we move and have a conversation, I like that my speakers are very onto time. It means that we're going to have lots of interesting chats a bit later. I'd like to introduce Dr. Angie Mkhabane, who is the Director of Internationalization and Partnerships at the University of South Africa. Dr. Mkhabane holds a doctoral degree from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and she plays a crucial role in advancing UNISA's global strategic collaborations and international academic engagement. With a distinguished career in higher education, Dr. Mkhabane brings extensive experience in international partnerships, project management, and the development of academic networks. She has been instrumental in forging key institutional agreements with global partners, such as recent memoranda of understanding with universities in Hungary, Uganda, Tanzania, Russia, the US, and many more that expand opportunities for mutual research, innovation, engaged scholarship programs, and student and staff engagement and mobility in critical niche areas identified by the university. Dr. Makhabane's experience is further enhanced by her background in policy in higher education administration, work including previously working at the working as a higher education policy specialist within the Department of Higher Education and Training. Her work in DHET laid the ground for the development of the National Framework on Internationalization of Higher Education in South Africa, which was enacted by DHET in 2019. Her work at UNISA continues to contribute to expanding internationalization opportunities to benefit students through short and long-term mobility and other co-curricular activities at UNISA. Dr. Makhabane is recognized for her commitment to uplifting African scholarship through meaningful and sustainable global partnerships for advancing UNISA's mission of excellence in teaching, learning, research, and engaged scholarship. Dr. Angie, the floor is yours. Malibongwe.
Ma- 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 we- Malibongwe, likamala bakosigazi. Libongwe, likamala bakosigazi. Malibongwe, malibongwe, malibongwe. Amanda. I always wanted to do that. Comrade Lucy, thanks for being here and, affirming this. So, yeah. Amanda, where to? I'm trying to get rid of the nerves. Good. I don't know if it's afternoon or still morning. Morning, colleagues, Dumelang, Abusheni, Jambo, Habari, bonjour. I hope everyone is well. Thank you, colleagues, and I'm honored to be here. I'm not going to take too much time because the last three speakers have said quite a lot on this subject. But when I was preparing to speak, I framed my engagement around the issue of internationalization. So I used the recent definition of internationalization that was coined by two scholars from this country, Samia Chesi and Savo Heleta, which looks at internationalization in a decolonial and contextually relevant lens. So as you know, diplomacy is about internationalization, about international relations. So I thought, let me bring this to the table, this new definition that we need to think about, that we need to internalize, that we need to take to spaces that we go into when we negotiate, when diplomatically engage with our potential partners. So for them, two scholars say internationalization of higher education is a critical and comparative process of the study of the world and its complexities, past and present inequalities and injustices, and possibilities for a more equitable and just future for all. Through teaching, learning, research, and engagement, internationalization fosters epistemic plurality, integrates critical, anti-racist, and anti-hegemonic learning about the world from a diverse global perspectives to enhance quality and relevance of education. So when you listen to this definition, you start thinking internationalization for who, how do we do it? Because when you look at the history of internationalization, it has always been influenced by the practices in the North, in the West. Even diplomacy itself as a concept is framed around the behaviors and the models that are in those countries. So in the context of the continent of Africa, how do we now say, in line with this international engagement, this is how we want to engage in a diplomatic sense. For us as a people of South Africa, Ubuntu on its own, it is diplomacy. It is a diplomatic element. So we have been practicing diplomacy. It's not a new thing. Women have always been diplomatic in their own spaces, negotiating relationships with families. As you can imagine, women always negotiate relationships with their in-laws, with their partners, so we have always been the masters of diplomacy. So going into diplomacy as a concept now, I looked at Cornelia Jola and Marcus Hornbrost say in the book titled Understanding International Diplomacy, they affirm that diplomacy cannot be understood without taking seriously the role of communication as an ontological anchor of diplomatic interaction. This signals that diplomacy is the art of communication, be it in politics, be it at home, be it anywhere else. It is the art of communication. So you can't say women cannot communicate. That's something that I understand. They also don't understand that. So this definition says diplomacy as a dialogue enables states to work out their relations, as we are trying to do with the US. We are through these interactions to form alliances, to conclude partnerships, to conclude negotiations around tariffs and stuff like that. However, such conversations as women, are we saying we just want women to be in the room to listen or to contribute? It was clear from the earlier speakers, women need to be in the room, not just for numbers, but for impact, to ensure that whatever that is being negotiated in that room caters for all the other people in the communities, in war-torn countries, in every part of the communities that we, specifically for us in the continent. So I am using the two definitions for us to say women have been in this space for many years. It might not have been in an international forum, which obviously when you talk diplomacy, people already thinking international. But there's quite a lot of local diplomacy that is happening, as alluded to by the previous speakers. So we need to, as we rethink how we internationalize as universities, as the continent or universities in the continent, we must also think about our values, our principles. How do we Africanize the spaces that we internationalize in? How do we do that? How do we do that? So I'm posing the question to you guys, colleagues, because you are academics. I know you have quite a lot of solutions to these problems that are confronting us today. So I have a lot of needs. So framed with the definition that I spoke to, and now the one on what diplomacy means, then comes the issue of inclusivity. So I spoke about how do we not leave everyone, how do we take everyone with us when it's internationalization, diplomatic negotiations, all these things. So in the works of Gajeni, Samia Chesi, Pelosi, and many others who speak about decolonization, inclusivity for them is a concept that means that we need to have equitable access of participation, women in particular, and young people in particular, especially in the continent, because our continent has got a lot of young people that would one day have to leave this continent. So inclusivity in that sense. we need to emphasize social justice, equality. We need to accommodate diverse perspectives. We need to move away from the notion that what is being practiced in the West and the North and Europe and everywhere else is the best. Africa has the best of the best. After before those came here and took everything from us and went back and documented. They were just good at documenting things that we were not able to document. But we are it, Africa. We are it. And we need to take that space. The young woman who became the Miss Universe told us, take up the space and cement yourself and do these things, not just sit on the table. Know what you are bringing to the table. What is it that you are bringing to the table? What is it that you want? Because this is about negotiation. This is about presenting interests of different governments, different people. So how do you do it in such a way that you leave the table having made an impact? You leave the table having presented whatever that you wanted to present in a respectful way that you know, but making sure that whatever that you are advocating for is listened to and actioned. So inclusivity, we need inclusive policies. We need inclusive, we need to design curriculums in such a way that they speak to the African context, not the European Eurocentric context that obviously our universities, when they were established long time ago, they were done in such a way that we will continue to depend on West in terms of knowledge and other things. There are so many things that we can do. UNISA, as you know, has the biggest or the largest footprint in the continent and in the world by virtue of it being UNISA, University of South Africa, the largest ODE, and we deliver education. You meet you where you are, student. We invest quite a lot of technology. And these universities in the West and the North learn from us. So we are the best. We have the best in this country, in this continent. We should not doubt ourselves. So I wanted to speak also about young people, young women in diplomatic spaces. We have recently, I'm not sure if you are aware, witnessed appointment of Ms. Lerato Matebogo, who I went to university with. She's in the African Union Commission. She is leading the trade sector, yes, and safety. So what does that mean for us as a country, having this young woman from South Africa participating in the space that has always been dominated by men for so many years, especially in this continent? What does that mean for us? As a university, as universities, as the country, as COSATU, as everybody else, it means we must rally behind her work. It means we must champion the work that she does in that space. We need to support her because she will obviously likely face a lot of challenges, a lot of blockages. How do we then come on board and say, as South Africa, we are behind you? We need to engage more with her work. We need to engage more with the work that they do and what she can bring to the country. Legacy, challenging in a way to say, let's see how we, as UNISA, for instance, and COSATU can work with her. There's quite a lot of work that is happening around the implementation of the trade agreement. There's quite a lot of things. There are barriers, there are language barriers. We are not united as a continent. How do we now implement this framework in such a way that we come out of it succeeding and also united? Because we are just, we fight with, I mean, And how do we make sure that women are at the forefront? Because we have been led by men. We are not saying they didn't do what they needed to do. They did to a certain extent, but as women, how do we take the work forward? And how do we make sure that the impact is larger, is not just for our own country or national, it's continental. That's how we will get respected as a continent. Um, I'm not going to talk too long, by the way, because I want us to engage. So the issue of science diplomacy is very important. It has been mentioned. It's very important for us as the university, as the higher education sector. Young women who are in the sciences, how do we support them? How do we come up with mentorship programs that can enable these young women to take their work to the next level? I'm sure there are other projects that are happening, but how do we get these to be implemented at a larger scale and target young people in schools while they're still young before they even come to university, so that they are conscious of this concept of science diplomacy, ensuring that science is used to solve issues that are confronting societies everywhere else in the world. How do we bring our young? I know there is a science diplomacy capital for Africa that is hosted by the DSI. Yeah, DSI, CSIR, I think, and the NRF. It's a really dynamic platform. How do we work with them to make sure that young people in high schools are aware of this platform? They come on board with projects. They also see themselves making impact in the continent with the work that they do. How do we do that? Let's think about it. So as I was listening to the three speakers talk about how the work that women have done, so much work that women have done and are continuing to do in the diplomatic space, in their various capacities, in communities and everywhere else. But also without recognition. So I thought of this Tswana proverb that says, "Mosadi tshweu jewa mabogo." Speaks Tswana in here. Mosadi tshweu jewa mabogo means women, loosely translated as meaning women do really work hard, often without recognition. And it's being a woman, in a way, seen as a thankless job. To this program. So let's gotta perpetuate that as women, as universities. Let's not perpetuate the saying that mosadi tshweu jewa mabogo. Mabogo a mosadi tshwantse a recognize, do quite a lot of work. So I just wanted to throw in that to show you what Lena multilingual and yeah, I mean, you spoke about Palisa, issue of tariffs, the issue of vaccines and this and that. That's exactly why this definition of internationalization is saying we need to rethink how we do things. We need to rethink how we enter into partnerships. We are so dependent on our Northwestern partners to an extent that when they say today we are taking this away from you, then you get devastated. Look at us now. What happened with the USA? How do we, as people, as university, I can tell you Africa is full of the smartest people in the world. How do we claim that? How do we use that to benefit the continent itself? So let's do away with dependency. This dependency that we have been on for so many years, that was also perpetuated by some of our leaders. How do we now start driving these conversations? we can do it in different spaces, forums, different forums that we have, that we have continental forums as well that women participate in. How do we now bring all these voices together and ensure that we, we go into these negotiation tables speaking with one voice, speaking with conviction that what we're bringing on the table is, is solid and we stand by it. Let's be confident. Why are we not confident about things we are bringing on the table? Must we suffer because now we want to be diplomatic or we don't want to offend people? Must we do this? So I'm just putting in a whole lot of these questions so that we can reflect on and just think about as the day goes. I have written a few. Yeah, for instance, when you look at South Africa, the diplomatic space, as Melos indicated, we made strides in ensuring that we have more ambassadors, high commissioners representing the country. But the question now that remains still is it just the numbers? These women, when they go there, go out there, is the work that they do properly documented? Because it's easy to erase the legacy of a person when the other one comes in. Because we don't document. They do incredible work. These women, they go and do incredible work in these countries. But as a country, we recognize the work that they do. We document it properly so that it's part of the history that our young people will consume instead of consuming other diplomatic things that are in other parts of the world. So yeah, I just wanted to leave us with that and to say thank you to Grace and the team for inviting me to come and speak. I was a bit worried when I saw the feminist. I'm like, oh my God, I only see Miss Lucy on TV. Now I'm going to be on stage with her. But as women, women, when we get together, we sit on the table, already we start coming up with other activities. We're thinking, oh my God, we should do this, we should do this, we should do. So that's what this kind of space is for. Co-creating, co-constructing, thinking together, working together, collaborating in our own spaces, forming these solid relationships at home first. And then when we go out on united front, we are able to convince people that we are exactly what we are talking about. Because we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mkhabane, for those words. And I am reminded question that you asked, which really brought this back, salute wasekhaya, because the conversations of the institution and the academic project, ideological positioning of reimagining Africa's intellectual futures, was really excavated in your statement, and particularly when you ask, how do we leave the table without losing ourselves? Because we go to these tables that have been constructed and created, but how do we then get to those tables and then not leave pieces of ourselves there? And I think that's a critical part of this conversation as we think around diplomacy, as we think around women and the involvement of diplomacy. Because you also speak to the fact of the effective labor of women in everyday settings. And I think that we don't take into consideration that effective labor in those particular spaces. So how does the labor of women in these spaces become recognized and does not go, is not seen as a thankless job? Thank you very much to all our speakers for really bringing together this conversation. had Solosi, who spoke very much about about women and the working class women and those cross solidarities. Um, we had Tuskegee who spoke to really what is happening in science diplomacy at the moment and all of these shifts that we're seeing, challenging us to think about what is it going to look like and how are women going to be particularly impacted. And then Dr. Mahamane brought it back and said, how do we think about this science diplomacy? How do we think about it? Do we think of decolonizing? How do we start from that position so that we don't leave ourselves at the table? So thank you very much to our speakers for that. I am going to ask our speakers to please join me on the chairs in front to open up for the part of the conversation. We have to start the conversation. So I would like to get a round of questions from the floor uh, to, to kick us off. I will take three sets of hands. We've got one hand in front here. Do we have another hand over there? Okay. Okay. Just one hand. I think it's off.
know, that's that that one of the things about this point where it has been as a continent that we need to address the one but I think the point about directions and also for um, and South Africa. So I think I mean, not having direct sponsor right now. Um, and referring to one of the universities that responded to this challenge as a matter of internationalization, which I think, in my view, that was the issue of what we understand as internationalization. Internationalization is supposed to unlock conflict, but therefore create those opportunities that we are able to provide evidence or fact as to how are they facing our agenda, our architecture, agenda, etc. Hello. Okay. Thank you. So I think as far as I'm taking this data as to we are going to talk about this one directional thinking. It's about when I was still speaking of research in the country and the research there were quite a number of opportunities as well. So I would like to some of the government that are responsible for this. Here's a good work with them whereby also intra-Africa private that development is concerned. And you will have countries like Nigeria where they will put in a grant that is able that is now I think that is illegal. So a particular on African countries that now you see the plan for what direction now South Africa, Japan, Botswana, that when Botswana, I think that's the South Africa. So I'm trying to use that example as a case. The other countries, as far as they're South Africa, partnership, in other say but we are all but so much. But yeah, this is what these become very key. Only by speaking for how or the cooking. So they can go back see the video of it never was. So yes, they know I'm not okay, they're not we don't have the voice, we're not good about it. But the internationalism, and become the one that speaks also on behalf to say why the product and why the system of the time of the consider Africa. So I think for me, meetings there, it's a very important thing. You know, we should going back to how the person is so much really are, you know, I know what was said about on living the one without ourselves, or ourselves as Africans, and finding solutions that also work for us as Africans. I remember during COVID-19, we don't know what we were going to do and how we were going to deal with the pandemic at that time. We were on lockdown, jobs were being threatened, wars, companies closed down, people were dying. But we went back to our African medicines. We were all screaming, not because screaming was not there, but because we knew the way from who we are as Africans. And we took whatever that the government science that came with, I don't know, politics. I mean, I don't know if ambush, the terminology of being correct. But we realized that, you know what we were taught on how to build our immune system from our mothers, grandmothers, and recipes of home, we then realized that what they have in the crap out of the ourselves that money. So we went back to who we are. And I think centering ourselves and going back to in the conversation, traditional leaders at the time, you know, were watching Chiloane. And there was no decision that he shall and live without that. Having in head and then in the decision that he with them. And we're advocating and we're driving decisions that mainly that are going to so I think the feminine also become empowered. Generally, to diplomacy is not just a global health issue. It is what we do, and I think that we are losing the value of feminine in the African continent. Hence, we think that anything that is African is inferior. And as a result, our children are now holding concepts of identifying themselves as who they are, other than who we are as African, who moved with us, who the church was saying that it is our diplomatic language, it is who we are. That is why at times we are concerned about the Afrophobia that we see, be it in the workspaces or in our communities. That is why we are worried about the
you everywhere, especially from Africa and Europe. They employ a lot of people also from Africa, but because they understand what needs to be done, why they're doing it. But we are not able to say to our communities, this is where we come from as the universities. This is why we are doing it. I think it's high time that we need to have conversations amongst ourselves as universities, but also with our communities, because the issue of xenophobia is prevalent in our communities, but we don't want it to spiral out of control because we are not playing our roles as the people who are supposed to create knowledge and share the knowledge with the communities. Thanks. I also forgot to say, there's what we call the Africa Charter for Transformative Research, which UNISA is signatory to, and the University of Cape Town and other universities in the continent. So if we are signatory as a university to such a charter, then we cannot be short-sighted in terms of who comes to our university and to come and work and produce. But I don't think UNISA has issues in that front. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think actually, I had just said to President Lucy that on this issue, I'd like for her to touch on this issue of the Qatar moment when we had that crisis of Rwanda resolving the DRC impasse in Qatar, because I think it's one of the important moments as far as the point she was referring to as to we don't speak as the continent. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any more questions, comments from that conversation? Okay, Prof, so we are going. Because I also, can we just get a mic? Yeah, yes.
No, thanks. Good afternoon to everyone. You know, we're panicking now as we're supposed to talk to the academia or the academics and profs and so forth. I just have one question. A lot has been said and we really appreciate it. We also got Mukhabulo today in terms of other issues. I'm going to deviate a bit from the trade question in the geopolitics. But the president has indicated that central to this is issues of human rights. And now we're having issues of us gathered here commemorating women, which is a good thing. But would like to also get Mukhabolo as to how can we continue to celebrate women by not leaving anyone behind? Because we happen to also be narrow sometimes, if one could use such a word, when we're engaging on human issues or human in general. We then talk about women, and we forgot that we're mothers of that we see. That will bring me to another side or the second part of my question that will talk to the issues of the other phobias that are in Africa in general. And we are talking about migration, we're talking about a lot of things, but in Africa, for example, normally I don't want to talk about this because people will always look at how I look. But we know that the LGBT community is not allowed in a lot of countries, actually more than 90%.
and we're in the center stage, we happen to forget or maybe sideline these kind of discussions to say, how do we influence? And if we're talking about human rights, why are we sidelining certain rights? I just want us to maybe one day, if not today, to have this particular discussion, because it also would touch on the issues of the trans women and other deep issues that are surrounding this particular topic. But as we migrate, how do I migrate to a country that doesn't have laws that are favorable to my sexuality or to my gender? So as South Africa, how do we influence Africa or any other country into, we're not saying we're imposing our views, but we're saying people are existing within your area or your own countries, and how are you treating those particular civilians? It's very important to Africa thriving, because you need everybody to be part of this. And when we talk of that minority, we'll also talk to the people with disability, that we also leave them behind. And it becomes very painful, because we are women, we're mothers, and for people or women that led the march, they didn't go there individually to say, it's women, it's women. They said, together with our men. Together with our men. So that's maybe if we could just get to understand, for those that know better, to say, what should be done? Or how can we mitigate in these challenges that we're facing? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for shifting that conversation and bringing that to the fore. Are there any questions, any comments? We have somebody over there, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lesego, and I would like to warmly welcome the discussions from the panelists and further pose a question to them. Both the Freedom Charter and the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa affirm unequivocally that South Africa belongs to all those who live in it. However, the Immigration Act introduces a regulatory framework that governs lawful entry, residence, and departure, effectively distinguishing between legal and illegal presence in the country. So given this tension, to what extent can the constitutional rights, particularly socioeconomic and human rights, be said to apply to undocumented or irregular migrants? Does the Constitution protect all persons within the borders of the Republic, or only those whose presence complies with the legal framework? And how do we reconcile this tension without compromising the foundational values of dignity, equality, and justice? One of the things that provoked me to actually ask this question is that you would have seen in the media foreigners cannot take their children to the clinics if their parents don't have citizenship in the country. So I just needed to be clarified with the contradictions between the Immigration Act as well as the Constitution and what is also stated in the Freedom Charter. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we hand over to the panel? Do you want an opportunity, Prof? Because I want an opportunity. No, I think that one of the conversations that we're having and what seems to be clear across all of the discussions is this issue of scarcity, and particularly as we're having all these conversations that link to each other. So, and one of the reasons why there are power imbalances in terms of diplomacy stems from this position of scarcity. What then of diplomacy in this position of scarcity? How then do we imagine or reimagine diplomacy where we move from this position of scarcity? Because we go to, and I like the destabilization of the North. We go to the North because of perceive scarcity and want to get this. We're trying to ensure that people are able to move because there is this perceived scarcity. How do we see and imagine diplomacy, particularly science diplomacy, in this context of this scarcity that defines where we are in the moment? Thank you.
I think the questions around Immigration Act. Let me perhaps start the mic this particular direction. So, as an act of equality,
I'm going to pass it now to Dr. Angie. But I just wanted to touch on that, but also the issue of the inclusion, especially as it relates to queer and people living with disability. This discussion and this issue is a conversation that Africa does not want to have. And trade unions will seem to be the voice in these debates. I remember in the International Labour Organization, in the ILC, we were discussing a convention that will eliminate violence and harassment in the world of work. It took us 2 years. It was adopted in 2021. ILC, International Labour Conference, on the 25th of June. But it took us 2 years. And point of contention, the only issue that made it to be so long was because African countries refused to have LGBTQI plus mentioned under vulnerable groups. We said Africans, we agreed on all issues except that issue, as we were united as African countries, except on that matter. And I remember when we hosted the African countries in Durban, with us concluding so that when we go to the ILO, we are together. Spokesperson for Africa, which was, I don't know if it was Uganda at the time, said you will never see it. Because this, for us, as African countries, was it Uganda? For African countries that are religious, I don't know that they are countries by religion or something, does not exist. Said, unity is the opposite, because migration to South Africa in particular, it is those that you say don't exist in your own countries. And here, and I remember the minister at that time, Mama or AKZN, Olifant, said, I can take you. It's a pity that we are in KwaZulu-Natal and we don't have much time. You've been landing in Johannesburg. I will take you to Hillbrow. I will take you to the spaces where your people have aspired. How they are victims of sexual violence, everything that we're trying to avoid because you claim that in your own country they don't exist. The reason you don't see them is because they are here. But it does not mean they don't exist. And as a trade union movement, we've been very firm on this issue. So it's a discussion that I agree with you, we are not having. And as a result now, with the current administration in the US, things are even worse. We were better off with the previous administration. The current one in the ILO, just on issues of budget, we knew that we were dealing with African countries that did not want to pass the budget of the ILO because it said gender. And they said, what does it mean by gender? Gender means everything, including queer. And they said African countries specific, then we'll help you to pass the budget. And now with this administration in Washington, we are struggling now, even in the discussion in the G20, because the terminology now becomes the issue. You can't say gender now, you must say women and men. You can't say diversity. So, yes, so these are I think in all spaces where we're at, I think we must anchor this conversation of inclusion as far as the queer community, including people living with disability. Because really, I think we have left it to be, it's an uncomfortable position, and therefore it's like women's rights in the bargaining space. So we say, when we are bargaining, particularly in the auto industry, I remember when I was in the auto sector, women issues of issues, because the negotiators are male. So he said, you know, if, and that's saying we're not in the business of making babies, we're in the business of making cars. So these issues of maternity protection and child care facilities are issues that we think we can trade off, and easily being trade off, because many companies who are negotiators do not understand the importance and what it means to a female worker, the importance of having these. So I think we've also left to that space, those discussions in those spaces. The issue of the Constitution, the Freedom Charter, ourselves as trade unions, we say we're organizing workers, whether they are migrant, documented or undocumented. For us, it is key that the rights are protected. That is why we are fighting to ensure that, particularly workers in the vulnerable sectors, in the farming industry, in domestic sector, and you realize that these are largely undocumented. From Lesotho, from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, or Eswatini in the main. And for us, what we understand is that the Constitution protects everybody, including the labor laws of our country. And that is why we are fighting for them to be represented, irrespective. But also, I think the discussion that you were talking about, Doc, of intra-Africa discussions on issues of trade becomes important, because what we see at most is that governments, I know now we're having a discussion with Lesotho about portable social portabilities of benefits, social benefits. Governments are more worried about that money than the workers, documented workers who have been working in the mines in South Africa, where the want is that if you talk about social portability, bring it to us, but it never reaches the recipients, even beneficiaries. And I think this is a discussion that we must have. But also, you know, Doc, you said there will not be, South Africa will not prosper if the region, there is no peace and stability. So it does not matter what we seek to do as South Africa. Of course, our great policies attract our brothers and sisters to come in. But until our leaders are able to have an honest conversation with their counterparts about human rights, we will not be able to move to where we want to be. South Africa will always be taken for me as the most unequal society in the world that allow people to live because there are no human rights. Anyway, South Africa becomes the worst because we've embraced what comes into South Africa, and we're trying to ensure that what we have we're sharing with our brothers and sisters. I think, but abafundileyo bazawungena kakhulu kwezile micimbi.
No, I actually don't want to dilute your it's a perfect response. So I'm gonna hand it back to the program director. I think Melosi did a good job covering those two questions. I don't want to dilute them, but yeah.
There was a question on science diplomacy and scarcity, and it has to do with the. Okay, but nonetheless, thank you for doing your job and protecting us. That's the job for. Thank you very much. Science diplomacy really in the context of scarcity. I think when my colleague Angie was responding earlier on, I was also reminded by one of the examples that stand out when you talk about science diplomacy. It is the SKA in South Africa. Right, and yes, I'm not much so well vested in terms of the SKA, but I know that it's a project that is doing well, but also very much reliant on the US funding or donor funding. Right, and I think then it brings me back to the question. I know that it's a question, so maybe question to question of. In the continent, as we know that this science diplomacy is not advancing that intra-Africa collaboration, which can move us from at least 1 inch of a scarcity point to the next. I'm then left wondering as to what is that big project that we are having as intra-Africa that is, even if it's half of the magnitude of the SKA, because I think we do require to advance this gap of diplomacy within the continent that is reliant on the resources that produced in this continent. SKA is very much largely based on the wind energy, right? And we are here also thinking about those who are excavating the earth to unearth those minerals coming from from the continent, and largely, of course, being labeled as from either Lesotho or Zimbabwe. But that's not my point that I'm trying to labor. But I'm trying to labor on the point that if we are at a juncture where we are able to talk about mining or the critical minerals, and those are not driving the science diplomacy and drive us away from the scarcity, I think we still have a long way of understanding science diplomacy within this continent. And our science diplomacy, oftentimes, it's very much reactionary to volatile situations in conflict, in violence, but not to the human development. And that is why we are talking about the scarcity today as to what is that facilitator of the knowledge capacity, the knowledge vessels in the form of African people through its minerals or through its be it grants that are really coming from the financial grants or whatever the system might be. Africa, I think it's one of the countries that are sitting at about 40 of what the global agreement towards investing in science, technology, and innovation, or just science research and development. I think South Africa at some point was at about 0.8 of its GDP, and the agreement is 1.7 per country that needs to at least invest its GDP. And majority of the African countries are sitting at just about 0.4. But also we know these issues of currency, diverse currencies, they're diluting our power, because at some point you are sitting with Sierra Leone that is reporting to invest 1.6% of its GDP to research and development, but it is unable to respond to Ebola crisis, for instance. So I think the issue of science diplomacy, it is a critical issue that we need to really delve into. And I don't think a half a day conversation or a dialogue on science diplomacy would do us justice. I think, Prof, as you're delving on this transformation issue, science diplomacy to have a special moment in understanding these issues, the question you asked, because it is a critical question. We cannot leave it to just a table conversation. we cannot leave it to a performance of a crisis as and when it emerges, but then we are making utterances that are performative. I do think that there needs to be a deliberate action as to what does the science diplomacy in Africa look like. The science diplomacy capital for Africa you're referring for, it is a platform for deliberations and an interesting platform which oftentimes occupied by the diplomats. But I don't know as to, are we really utilizing that platform to have these honest conversations as President Lucy is referring to? Because if that platform, it is intended as a platform to usher in African voices and be representative and drive these critical questions, then I think that that platform is not doing just in terms of understanding the purpose and the importance of science diplomacy. I know that Angie mentioned the fact that we have been dealing with it from a perspective of Ubuntu, so we have been championing that. But I think that at times also we should change ourselves with our approach to Ubuntu, because then it ushers in familiarity. And it suggests that we should not have honest conversations in the name of being Ubuntu, or in the name of practicing Ubuntu. But I think, yeah, it attached to the science diplomacy as how it advances this conversation of reducing the scarcity. Because at the center of it, it is intended, of course, to capacitate, to ensure that we can have the skills that are produced within the country or the continent that are able to take forward the innovation, be that it is technological innovation, be it is cultural innovation, be it is economic innovation, and otherwise. It is actually supposed to advance such conversation. So I'm hoping that in the near future, the issue of science diplomacy, we will not just address it as a mere exercise of being polite or performing a science as something cute to do. I did mention that earlier on, we do get caught in the dichotomy of, yes, we want to perform science because the results are exciting and we want to produce papers that sound radical as far as transformation is concerned on those policies. But at the same time, we have not begun to set the stage to welcome such radical transformation as far as science diplomacy is concerned in its typology that is out there, informed by the American Association of Sciences. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Doc, for that. Do we have any questions, any further comments? If we online, can we just have a look and see if there's anything? Nothing online. Okay. Yes, Doc. Okay. Just the last two. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You know, I just wanted to tap on the topic of discussion on the science diplomacy and also what Melosi shared with us earlier on. She made a very profound statement when she reflected on a very serious period during COVID-19 and the lockdown that resulted from COVID-19. That naturally as Africans, we retreated into what we know best, because we were under threat by something that we don't know. And that really showed how one's would go back to your roots when you are in a state of chaos and a state of not knowing what this monster is that you are dealing with, And so I think, how we concocted things that we know best and how those things worked. Because when you look at the real issue of COVID-19, how the world dealt with it and the impact that it had globally, the impact here in Africa was not as bad as in other countries, especially in Europe. And I think we should draw from that experience that we should not be shy of using our indigenous knowledge systems, because they do work. And we must just be able to gain the confidence that we require as Africans, that there is so much knowledge out there. But I think we get so much stuck with what we have learned during the colonial era. And it's only in times of crisis that we tend to retreat to those spaces. But we must have confidence that those African spaces do really carry weight. They have their own scientific knowledge, and we must really work hard to develop them and create and advance the African science and knowledge systems and take them to another level. But it seems that we tend to be so lax when there's no crisis. It's only in times of crisis that, that thing, kicks in, and we tend to use it in that moment of crisis, and then it falls off after that. So we really need a generation of scientists that can pick up this behavior, how we react to things, and how do we advance that knowledge forward. And we have a lot of knowledge. Trust me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was trying to behave myself, but this thing is like. So before I ask the question I want to ask, I watched this show on Netflix. It's called The Diplomat. And one of the characters there defines diplomacy this way. I love that moment. Like, he actually reminds me of me, the passion. He says, talk to your enemies. Talk again. Get tired again. So it's about talking to people you might not like. It's about talking. And he also says, talk to everyone. Talk to the terrorist. Talk to everyone. The question I have is for Melos. How was that moment in the White House when you were talking? In a moment where many of us here back home were saying, why talk to them? We must just show them the finger. You went and you talked. And I know you will be talking and talking and talking again. How was that moment? Briefly, Melos, I'm curious.
Thank you, Prof, for asking that question, because I also was very interested. It's just that I didn't want to make it about me. So I would like to offer President Losi the opportunity to respond to that question and maybe a few parting comments, and then you can hand it over to Doc Angie for her parting comments, and then I know that those were very strong parting comments, but like your last ones, like the last ones that's left in, and then we will close off the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think on this one, I always say, firstly, I always have an appreciation of that moment. Had it not been for the president making that call and saying, we need you to be part of this, but also being there, when you say diplomat, fight, talk, and I always say that as much as I was invited on Monday to fly on Tuesday to be there on Wednesday, when I got there, then I was told that the numbers have been reduced. And so when they said numbers have been reduced, they reduced it by 2. So it meant myself and the leader of business. And I said, no, I didn't fly 18 hours, 2 hours from here to Cape Town and then direct flight, 16 hours to New York, to Washington, just to watch the conversation on TV.
So I insisted, I said, see what you do, whether you're saying I'm going to carry the handbag of the president, as long as I'm getting into the Oval Office post, that's the reason why I was called to go in. But also with an appreciation of the President of the Republic of South Africa allowing me space to speak, because I always say that had it not been for him, I would not have spoken. But for me, what came to mind was I should, with the opportunity given, I must speak for the voice that is not heard, the voice of the most marginalized, the women who constitute majority in our country, the most vulnerable Black African women. And juxtapose this white genocide with the real issues that the majority of those marginalized are faced with on a day-to-day basis. And also just to allow the President of the United States of America to have an appreciation that we're not having this conversation for the first time because we're in this administration. We've been to Washington during the President Biden's administration on AGOA. We've been negotiating, I've been there negotiating on the importance of AGOA. And of diplomatic relations, because remember when the new administration came, that channel was closed off. It became a different voice that spoke on our behalf other than the voice that represents South Africa in the corridors of Washington. And one had to, given that opportunity, to remind all of us why we are in Washington. That we are here to open those diplomatic relations, trade relations, the importance of trade of the two countries. It's a win-win situation. The reality of over 500,000 jobs that are at stake, which we are not out of the woods now with the tariffs that we must navigate. But also that South Africa, we don't have a race issue. We have a crime issue in South Africa, not race. I mean, our brothers and sisters in clubs, we don't have a problem. For me, what was key and important, as much as that was a moment of a minute given to speak, but one had to find a way of reminding all of us seated there that why to Washington. We did not go to discuss a white genocide that does not exist in South Africa. We were there to open diplomatic relations and let us talk about these issues, which I think helped in the next actual meeting. Because what one understood, and I must say that we have a good leader in our president, because he kept on reminding us by his body language that do not enter into, the waters to get ourselves into the next meeting, because what everyone saw was the introduction of the South African delegation to Washington, not the actual meeting. Actual meeting happened after, which was behind closed doors. And things keep on moving, they keep on changing. That was me. Things have happened. It looks like it was years back, and things are moving very fast. And we thought in a better space when we left. We seem to be slippering all the time. But I think importantly, it is about these diplomatic relations that those that are given that opportunity to speak on our behalf continue to have that conversation. As you say, we must always have that conversation, even with those that do not want to speak to us. I'm from a trade union background, but I always understand that trade unions are not about toying. It is about being able to sit at that table and have conversations that are uncomfortable with those that maybe seem to have a different ideological grounding from us. Because for South Africa to prosper and for all of us to be in a better place, we need everybody at the table to get us to the vision that we have set for ourselves. So ours is not about flags all the time and doing and sloganizing. It is about sitting at the table and having meaningful diplomatic conversations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your engagements. These were very, very enlightening and fruitful. I think we can all agree that we spent the day in a very productive manner. Thank you to the organizers. So my last parting words, I will just say representation matters. It matters. One of the quotations that I will quote is from the UNDP, UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, who said she challenged us to commit to doing everything in our power to ensure that women are present at the table, that our voices are heard, and that our contributions are truly valued. In addition to that, Africans, know yourselves, Africans. There's a lot that we have in common than what divides us. Let's work together. Let's see how we want to leave the continent to our kids. We want to leave it as fractured as it is, or we want to leave it as a united continent to our children and our upcoming generations. So we really need to have difficult conversations as a continent. We are not having these conversations. Our leaders are not having these conversations. Our universities are having these conversations, but do these proposals and research and all this data that is harvested by academics, does it go to the ears of the leaders to inform development and transformation and all these? Are we not doing enough as universities to bring governments on board in terms of working with governments? We do quite a lot of work that can help the continent and our countries. But are we doing enough? That's the question I would like to leave you with. Are we doing enough as universities to educate our communities, to sensitize our communities about a whole lot of things that we read about, that we write about, that we create as scientists and as researchers? Do we do enough?
Thank you very much. On the parting shots, and I think it's a beautiful coincidence that we are gathered here today. Tomorrow it is the 7th, the 30% kicks in. And I know I'm saying it with utmost candor, but I think also I'm saying it with utmost concern because of, as you are thinking about Lesotho, that is now stressed by the 50%. And we know that 30% of those women who were beginning to work in the formal sector of agriculture, they will go back to subsistence farming. It's going to pit us against one another. I'd like to thank the DLT, Executive Director, and the team that you've worked with, the university, for allowing us the space to have this debate, conversation, contentious and charging emotionally and academically and otherwise. So I'd like to really thank you for that opportunity. And perhaps the executive director started us by Nina Simone. I wish I knew how it would be to be free. I'd like to close it off by saying, please don't let me be misunderstood by Miss Nina Simone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. And thank you very much to our speakers. I'm going to ask that we just stay here because we've come to the end of the program. We're doing the vote of thanks and then the gifts. Are we doing them? Yes. Okay. So I will hand over to Dr. Hlungwane, who is the Acting Director of Systems and Policies at the DLT, who will be doing the vote of thanks for us, and members from the DLT who will be doing the nice part with her. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Go and have lunch, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Switch off, switch off. Ira. I was saying, Sailor. Yes. Eddie, well. Yeah. One teacher. Yeah. What?